Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it very much. And Mike, for making the platform of the church available. And Jane, who has been hosting events and coordinating with the rest of the team that you see here. Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing some time on a Saturday. I'll keep this brief so we can do as much kind of conversation Q&A as possible. But thank you for the opportunity. I am running for governor. I'll give you a very quick just background and bio. Certainly, if you've been watching MSNBC, you may know who I am. If you haven't, though, and certainly there are those who choose to get their news elsewhere, I'll give a brief bio. For those who are part of what I call the MSNBC family, though, I really mean this. There's not a punchline. Thank you for being a part of that family. Uh, I kind of learned as I came up in TV a little bit after Congress, it really becomes a family, and without the viewers and the viewer feedback, our opinion and analysis means nothing, and kind of vice versa. So thank you very much. Um, my wife and I live in Pinellas County. We have two young kids who are 6 and 4. And I say it's kind of the perfect time to run for governor because they're out of diapers, but not on social media. So we can handle the next 14 months of this race. And as they travel with us, just experiencing a hotel is good enough for them. So, but 6 and 4, they're in school. And as you can imagine, a 6 and 4-year-old and the early years of parenthood inform so much perspective and so much of your life. And so I introduce that because it is, essential to who I am. I also am a person, our family, my wife as well, a very deep personal Christian faith. I say that not to evangelize whatsoever, to show respect for everybody else's faith and those of no faith at all, but subscribe to likely what I consider, what Jefferson called the natural rights of man. But my compass, my orientation, I'm a preacher's kid from Florida, fifth generation Floridian. That doesn't mean, it makes us any better or worse than someone who moved here yesterday. But I grew up in a very conservative Christian faith environment, and I still subscribe to that faith. But without going into theology, Mike, I'll say count our family as the millions of people who are church hurt, who don't quite understand the direction of the church in the last 10 or 20 years with its marriage with politics. That's a tension that my wife and I wrestle with every day. And so not only am I in tension with my faith, I guess, certainly with my former party. I was a Republican member of Congress, part of my history from Pinellas County. Never a good enough Republican, Bush 41 Republican, ended up calling on Donald Trump to drop out of the race, never supported him, left the party, was an independent for about 6 years, today running for governor as a Democrat. But here's what I want you to know about this run for the governorship. And I say this having been involved in Florida politics for probably 30 years, all in, having run as a consultant or a manager 20 to 30 races. I've only been a candidate in about 4. I want to tell you something that I'm asking you to trust and believe when I say this, because I would not be in this race if I did not believe what I'm about to say. We can win next November. We can win next November. When I say we, I mean the big we, not David Jolly. I mean, there is a coalition ready for change in the state of Florida, capable of winning the governorship. I'll share with you some elements of why I know that to be the case. We are in the midst of a national change environment. You are seeing it through your engagement with Indivisible and with the DECs and other organizations, the rallies, the protests. We have seen congressional special elections in Florida move by 16 points in the direction of a Democratic-led coalition. The NPAs are moving maybe 50 points in some races. Wisconsin's judicial election, mayoral races, I believe, in Omaha. National change is upon us in the direction of Democratic candidates in a big way. We also are in a change environment in Florida because we have a generational affordability crisis that is hitting everybody from every walk of life, every voter registration. The affordability crisis doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, if you voted for the president or not, you're feeling it. Miami, Pensacola, Jacksonville, Tampa, everywhere in between. And so in a national change environment with a prescient, salient, generational issue for Florida, the opportunity to run a race for the Florida governorship and lead a coalition for change is how we see an Andy Beshear in Kentucky, a Steve Bullock in Montana. It's how we have a shot for the first time in a very long time to elect a Democratic governor. So that's the analysis. And I'm always cautious to lead with the analysis, but I think it's important that we appreciate the difference of this cycle compared to past cycles. Many of us left 2024 exhausted and defeated because we put in so much effort to try to achieve change and we didn't. I promise you, there's an opportunity in this environment to win the governorship as a coalition. How do we do that? What am I running on? Look, I always lead with three values. That I think they're just traditional values, cultural, American, societal values, but certainly political values that I think the country has generally held close, although I think they have become strained in the last decade or two. But I believe they are the bedrock values of today's Democratic Party. First, the economy should work for everyone. The economy should work for everyone, not just the wealthiest among us. The economy should work for everyone. It should lift everyone up from every walk of life, provide opportunity for everybody, regardless of the zip code you're born in. Secondly, the government should actually serve its people, its seniors, its veterans, its storm victims, Florida's families in need of excellence in public education. Go through the list. People needing efficient transportation to get to work, people needing an economy in Florida that actually provides jobs. So one, the economy should work for everyone. Two, the government actually has a role to serve its people, its taxpayers. And the third value is simple. We should be a state, a nation, and we certainly are a party where everyone is welcome and celebrated and lifted up, regardless of where you were born, the color of your skin, who you love, or who you worship. Those are values. And the reason I lead with those values is because values inform then our policies, but it also allows us to build a coalition bigger than our party. I often joke that, what I love about being a Democrat is we get to accept math and science and data, public health, vaccines, all those things, right? So look, math is math. There are not enough Democratic voters in the state of Florida to elect a statewide Democratic candidate just by ourselves. That does not mean we dilute the Democratic values. We pivot, we change. I disagree with a lot of leading Democrats nationally who say somehow we have to change. I came into the Democratic Party because I believe in its values, not because I want it to change, because I see in the Democratic Party those three values that I think are critical. And so it allows us, though, to build a coalition bigger than our party. I think we need, in terms of addressing the affordability crisis, we need a property insurance reform package that moves hurricane coverage out of the private market, reduces property insurance by about 60 or 70% for homeowners, renters, condo owners. We fund a state catastrophic fund to assume coverage of hurricane coverage. We need generational property tax relief. For those of you who have been here 20 years or so, you'll remember in the 2000s, we had a crisis in property taxes because longtime homeowners were getting hit with this escalation of property tax bills during the run-up of the 2000s. So it led us to save our homes and portability. Now we have the inverted problem. First-time home buyers can't enter the market. Young families can't enter the market because they absorb the boomerang of property taxes when they buy that parcel. So how do we have generational property tax release that keeps save our homes but brings in a stepped-up basis for first-time home buyers? We need multimodal transportation, not just big highways that charge you $10 to get to work. We need workforce transportation available. We need to bring in clean and renewable energies into our utilities, not just because it's good stewardship of the environment, but it drives down costs for consumers. We have answers within reach on the affordability crisis, but Republican ideology won't let our Republican leaders currently do it. We will. We can offer those solutions. So the affordability crisis is part and parcel. Serving our people. Government should actually work for its people. There are lots of examples. I'm just going to hit one very importantly, because if affordability is number one right now, the abandonment of public education in Florida is a moral wrong. It is a moral wrong that we have abandoned public education in the state of Florida. It is a moral wrong that our teachers are paid last in the nation. The third largest state are paid last in the nation. We need a renaissance of public education, a 10-year investment plan to make public education in Florida not just excellent, but a leader nationally. Now, how do we do that? Certainly, we start with increasing teacher pay, not by 2-3%, by 30. Now, let's be honest. Politicians should be as honest as everyone else is, right? We can't do that on day one. If day one promises worked, the war in Ukraine would be over. But we could say, look, we have a 3-year plan to get to a 30% pay raise, and that's our target. That's our bogey. We use tourist development money for it. Perhaps, we move state budget items around and reprioritize away from some of the special interests. But we certainly start with paying teachers more. We reinvest in capital structures. We make our capital structures in our public education system places where families want to go. But then we also look at expanding what is already there, which is, first of all, the greatest access to excellence in academia remains in public education today, not in our voucher schools. Voucher schools fund an environment, not education in all cases. And so we expand excellence in academia, but also access to the trades, to the arts, to culture, whatever it is that creates opportunity for kids to find their own way, create their way. We create over the next 10 years, but we start right now, a public education environment for Florida's families that actually serves its families, a renaissance. And then on the third value, what does that look like in policies, the value where everyone should be welcome? I can tell you this, the culture wars end on day one if we elect a Democratic governor next November. They don't end because of resignation. They end because we're going back to a state where everyone is welcomed and celebrated. The books come back into the classrooms, the handcuffs come off the teachers' wrists. The appointees of the last 6 years get replaced with people who believe in data science and academia, from our state university system to our water district boards for clean water and clean air to the Public Service Commission. We bring back subject matter experts. We bring back people that welcome diversity and understand how it makes the state stronger when we have institutions in our state that actually look like our state. So look, I think there is an opportunity here in a national change environment with a generational affordability crisis to say we are going to lead with values that are bedrock Democratic Party values, but are bigger than our party, that can attract members of the faith community that maybe traditionally perform for Republican candidates, that allow us to speak to gun owners and say, look, we know gun owners aren't the problem, but if we tighten gun safety prevention legislation in the state, we'll save your kids just like we save ours. We go to the ag community and say, your labor markets are tight because the governor is attacking communities, not crime. There are so many ways to expand our coalition, but it starts and ends every day with those values and acknowledging that we have an affordability crisis in the state of Florida that has answers, and our current leaders are unwilling to provide those answers for us. I know we have a shot to win this. The last thing I'll tell you is I'm going to leave it all on the field as a candidate over the next 16 months. We are going to be in every community. We're going to be building this coalition. This is not a race where 6 weeks before Election Day, we have to race around and ask people to help. We start now by building a coalition and saying, let's speak for each other now. Let's learn from each other. Let's build a coalition for change so that next summer we can race into November and actually win this race. I know we can do that. I really do. It's why I'm in this race. So thank you all very much for being a part of today's meeting. Bill, I'll let you or whomever.
It's me. I'm the one who's Vicky's
Choreograph.
monitoring the chat for me, and I have some of the
Okay.
questions. I just want to make a quick comment. Some of us on this call, David, went to Sarasota to an empty chair town hall that Maxwell Frost and Senator Murphy co-chair. And many of the same themes. In other words, he did a great job of just not having it be about beating up on the current administration, because God knows we could spend a lot of time and effort on that. And believe me, everybody on this call could give us stories, but that doesn't get us the kind of people elected that we need. And both of the two of them just did an incredible job. Were so well received. It was really powerful. And I just think it's really cool that it was aligned with what you're saying. So
yeah, can I jump on that just a minute? Because
sure.
listen, this is so critically important. We know the numbers in the state, right? For a Democratic governor to be elected, I'm going to say this a lot, not David Jolly. For us as a coalition, a change coalition, to elect a Democratic candidate, we've got to get everything right. Part of that is this is really tactical, but I mean it. The race for the governorship is not about Donald Trump. It's not about Donald Trump. And look, I am somebody for the past 8 years have spoken on TV about the president. I'm not shying away from that or suggesting we don't. we have to do multiple things right now. We have to go save the country from the constitutional threat of the president. But we've got an opportunity to elect a Democratic governor. So when you do both, just do them in separate emails to your friends, please, because I promise you, our opponent, watch this, our opponent wants the governor's race to be about Donald Trump, because the moment it becomes that, voters perform more reflexively about their partisanship and about the president. This is about the economy, public education, and safe communities in the state of Florida. And the fact that Republicans have failed to provide that for us, and we have a Democratic coalition ready to provide that.
Very good. Okay, I'm going to try to hit some of these questions now. The first one, let's see. Somebody asked about the environment. Let me see if I can see exactly what they said.
Let me read it.
What is your position about climate change and the proposed rollback of the greenhouse emissions regulation every other country in the world has endorsed?
Look, climate change is real, climate science is real, and as governor, I would make sure the state can once again acknowledge it and use it to inform state policy. That is a position, many considered me a squishy moderate Republican when I was in Congress 10 years ago because I believed climate science when Republicans wouldn't. Here's the first thing we can do, and I mentioned this, and I lament we're at a point in Florida history where I'm suggesting that the next governor just fire all of Ron DeSantis's appointees. But I'm afraid we're there because of who he has appointed to so many of our institutions and regulatory authorities. And that includes our water commissions and places in charge of protecting the environment. Right now, we have an appointment of developers and others with no interest and no background in clean water and clean air. We can immediately, we don't need the legislators' help to immediately appoint regulatory leaders throughout the state that bring back the adoption of climate science and fight for clean water and clean air in our policies, particularly around regulating smart growth.
Great. Thank you. Somebody trying to get them kind of in the order that they came in. Oh, how can we counter the Republicans and DeSantis redistricting, corruption, and Trump's influence?
Yeah, listen, this is really hard. We need nonpartisan redistricting commissions. One of the things I did in the independent space, I tried to mobilize the independent space for about 6 or 7 years after I left the Republican Party, and it is very adjacent to the democracy reform space, gerrymandering reform, primary reform, campaign finance reform, ballot access for candidates, frankly, ballot access for NPA candidates. And so this is a space, gerrymandering, we have to have generational reform and we have to move towards, I believe, nonpartisan redistricting. But right now, Ron DeSantis and the legislature, under the direction of the president, are determined to do everything they can. And I'm always reticent to say just because Republicans shatter the norms and break the rules, Democrats should. I do think this is an environment now where Democrats should, right? Whether it's Gavin Newsom in California or some of the other blue states, I think you've got to do it because what we know is called the efficiency gap. And this is what also always gets tested at the Supreme Court. I won't belabor this, but I'm an attorney. I get really into this stuff. The efficiency gap was most obvious, I believe, was in a Wisconsin case where 60% of voters in their state legislative elections actually voted for Democratic candidates, but the Republicans ended up taking 60% of the legislative seats because of how Republicans had gerrymandered the state. And it's a perversion of democracy, clearly a perversion of representation. So look, if I have the opportunity to serve, there are two things. Obviously, we lead with the bully pulpit. And if we have just changed the direction of Florida, I think Republicans now have to answer for a lot of things. But there's something else I would like to test as governor, and I'm not sure we have seen it before. Right now, the attorney general leads most litigation in federal court on behalf of the state. I don't know that the governor's office is prevented from leading litigation. I really don't. So even if we have a Republican attorney general, I am curious about using the office of the governor to litigate claims on behalf of the state's voters in a way we typically have relied on the Attorney General. Now, it might be an environment where Florida's governor and Florida's Attorney General end up in court adverse to each other, but we're going to use every tool we have within reach.
Yeah, very good. I'd like to hear you say that because many of us are frustrated that Dems at the national level, um, some are speaking up, but many are not. So
Sure.
Anyway, don't get me started. Somebody is asking here, David, about where do you stand on the Affordable Care Act Medicaid expansion, which at least 40 other states have adopted?
Yeah, we need to expand Medicaid in the state of Florida. We're one of only 10 states. Not only does it provide affordable health care to families, it's also a net revenue generator to the state of Florida under the current formulas, and the health outcomes went from states that have expanded Medicaid. And look, depending on your generation, Medicaid used to mean, one thing or another. I use the term affordable health care because that's what Medicaid is now in 2025. And we know it covers more than, I believe, 40% of childbirth care in the state of Florida. It certainly provides for people in end-of-life care and skilled nursing facilities. And it certainly provides for families who otherwise can't afford. And here's the interesting thing. Florida actually kind of chips away at expansion in some places, but Republicans won't call it that. We just need to rip the Band-Aid off and expand Medicaid in the state of Florida. And look, I won't belabor my journey towards the Democratic Party, but this is an area where I was not always there, right? My first elected office, I came up in what was the Obamacare cycle, the Affordable Care Act. And I was initially opposed to it. I eventually got to a place where Medicaid expansion made sense. I became part of the block of moderate Republicans that stopped all of the repeal votes, though I had taken some of those repeal votes. And this is a good example of my journey where, as I started to serve in Congress, I saw the impact of some of the Republican positions on communities, in this case, in need of health care. And so where I am now is not where I was 12 years ago. It is where I was, say, 7 or 8. But as my critics point that out, I do think change is part of my story. And I test that question in politics. Is it okay to change your mind? I think it is. That's why I'm running for governor.
We'll have to get you a t-shirt that says proud to be woke.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
One of the questions that we have is about the gulag just south of us in the Everglades,
Yeah.
which, the conditions there are just horrific. What would you do about that?
Yeah, and look, I think we also have to talk about Florida state prisons as well, that don't have air condition, and the conditions are, arguably deplorable. And none of that is to be soft on crime. It's just to be humane in how we detain people. Look, there is a way to immediately bring an end to the detention center in the Everglades, which I think we should. It starts with Ron DeSantis's emergency order that seized the land from Miami-Dade. I would simply end the emergency order of the governor, and the land goes back to Miami-Dade, and the detention facility closes. It is that simple. And you end up respecting the tribal rights of the Miccosukee Nation, and you end up protecting the environment of the Everglades. Look, I'm going to speak just a little bit about this because there are a few elements that are very important. And it's also part of why people understand the cruelty in this moment. We don't celebrate detention facilities, right? If we need capacity for detention, we just build it. But we don't do ribbon cuttings and step and repeats in media. So people see the cruelty of this right now. The other thing is, these are not dangerous criminals. If you look at the images, they're behind a chain link fence with 30 cots, right? So these are not dangerous criminals that are otherwise being put in this facility. And then it just begs the question then, if these are not dangerous facilities, is the most appropriate use of our law enforcement resources to go after people whose only offense is that they are in the United States working a day's labor for a day's wage to put food on their table so their kids can have the American dream and American opportunity? And oh, by the way, contributing to the American economy and American culture in incredibly rich and special ways? Is that really where we want to be deploying our criminal justice resources? No. We want them going after guns and sex trade and human trafficking and violent crimes. And if you talk to law enforcement officials, that's where they want to be going. I had breakfast, yesterday with a big city police chief here in the state of Florida, completely frustrated by the fact that 12 of his officers just got pulled off of community policing to instead do the bidding of Ron DeSantis and our attorney general and others. But here's the conversation I want to have with this state and nationally, and I think an opportunity for this coalition. Republicans for too long have gotten away with conflating immigration and crime, and
Right.
it's wrong. It is not statistically accurate. There is a higher propensity rate of violent crimes among native-born communities than immigrant communities by a factor of 2 to 1. In property crimes, it's a factor of 3 to 1. What Republicans are doing is they are fighting communities and looking for crime. They're fighting communities. They're not fighting crime. They're fighting communities. And so the party that I want us to be, the governor I want to be, the coalition I want to lead is going to be one that says we're going to be tough on crime. We're going to fight crime, but we're not going to fight communities. We're going to lift up communities. So what does fighting crime look like under our coalition and our campaign? It means if you were born here, if you immigrated here, or if you're a politician who stole $10 million from the state Medicaid program, if you broke the law, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to be tough on crime, but we're going to be a state that lifts up our immigrant community and recognizes their contribution to the state.
Okay.
Oh,
Hold it. I'm trying to figure. Oh, yes. Tell us a little bit about how you would approach the issue of gun safety. It's just such a hot topic, and just the raising of it gets the NRA and that whole crowd all ramped up. And those of us who live in a county like Charlotte County, which is about as red as you can get, we can almost see what the pickup trucks are going to be saying, if we begin to talk about that. So how would you approach that?
Yeah. So your last sentence is important because the race is going to focus on the affordability crisis, schools, and safe communities, right? Fighting crime. That's what we are talking about. Now, I don't shy away from the fact that I favor dramatic gun safety legislation in the state of Florida and nationally. Doing nothing is not good enough, and that's the current position. The current position of Republican leadership is to do nothing. There is so much more we can do, and and we're just going to have to take some hits politically from some. But I will tell you, the amount of bad faith on the other side of the argument here is so rich, we can't negotiate with bad faith. We just can't. But that doesn't mean we can't sit with gun owners and say, we're not trying to take away your gun. We're trying to make the state safer for you and for your kids. And what does that look like? We need universal and comprehensive background checks. Now, I use two terms that even Democrats don't often do in Washington. Universal means every transaction. My opinion, every transaction, including between family members, because nothing, just because you're related to somebody doesn't make you more or less capable of committing a crime if you actually have that propensity. But universal also means we have to look deeper into some records. Right now, the only background check is basically a criminal conviction check. And these are the words of a Republican conservative sheriff. The current background checks basically just look for a criminal conviction. What does that leave open? That means if there's a home where domestic violence regularly occurs and police have been called 3 or 4 times, but no charges are brought, no conviction of, say, that husband. The 5th time that husband goes out, buys a gun, comes home and kills his spouse. They buy the gun because nothing shows up in that background check that there have been 4 domestic violence calls to the home. Well, that should show up. Now, I understand due process. Look, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, I introduced gun safety legislation in Congress that did everything the Democrats wanted, but assured the due process that Republicans at least were paying lip service to. Allison Camerata on CNN said, Congressman Jolly, this makes too much sense. And that's why it didn't get anywhere, because it made too much sense. Look, the Parkland provisions need to be expanded. We need aggressive gun safety prevention legislation in the state of Florida. You could look at the size of clips, right? You could regulate the size of clips, which even a lot of assault weapon owners support. You could look at legislation that's been introduced that requires background checks to include a certain amount of ammunition. right? If someone's buying 50 or 100 units, whatever it might be. To me, this is just such a moral calling because I, I hate to punch at my opponents. It's not the first thing I want to do, but ask them what they are willing to do. Okay, to me, the greatest contrast here is at least where I am and where I think a lot of folks on my side of this race are, is we want to try. We want to try to do something. And in trying, we're willing to say, we will respect the responsible, lawful gun owner's rights to own that gun, but we want to try to do something to prevent the next school shooting. If we look at the other side of the aisle, they don't want to try anything. I've probably had to cover live 6 or 8 school shootings, and and we experience them together. It doesn't make my experience more or less prescient because I covered them live, but it just the cycle of conversation is so predictable, and it always ends with the other side never offering a solution, and that's not good enough. So let's offer solutions and have the debate and see where the state is. And if we lose, you know, support from those who just want to argue in bad faith that we're trying to steal their guns, that's a lie. That's a lie. But
It's
you
not
can't debate a
true.
liar. You can't debate a liar. So
Um, where do you stand on women's reproductive freedom?
I voted for Amendment 4. I support Amendment 4. I support the Roe Casey framework. And as governor, I would push to have it enacted into law just because it didn't get 60% of the vote. 57% of the state asked for it. We should have governor and legislature that fights for it. Now, I will keep this tight so we can cover a lot, but I do think there are two important things here. Um, I was not there 12 years ago. Many of you may have seen these criticisms. I don't run from this conversation. If it doesn't come up, I typically bring it up in a town hall because it's such an important issue. When I got elected to Congress, first time I was elected to office, I mentioned my faith upbringing, but also my current faith orientation. I was wrongly applying. I got it wrong. I admit this. I was wrongly applying my faith teaching to the constitutional question of choice and reproductive freedom. Now, for those who cared to watch, and no one really did back then, I was a backbencher member of Congress, but my journey started way back then because as I started to see the impact of some of these policy positions, I began to grow. So I became the only Republican to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation. When Republicans in 15 or 16 moved to defund Planned Parenthood federally altogether, take $400 million away, I authored compromise legislation that would have moved that money for a year to community health centers. Now, what I was trying to do was to continue, have a continuation of reproductive care in underserved communities by moving it to community health centers. I understood later that still wasn't good enough for many in the reproductive freedom movement. I understand that. But part of my journey was trying to figure out or understanding why this care was so critical and how do we continue to ensure it's provided. Now, what did that do? And you're going to hear this a lot among my critics. It meant Jolly was an author of one of the defund Planned Parenthood bills. But please understand, my bill was, yes, defunding for a year, but keeping the $400 million available for this care in communities. But politics is a soundbite industry. And so I get hit on, oh, Jolly wanted to defund Planned Parenthood, which, sure, some truth to it, but I've shared my context. But around then, I also got to where I was fully embracing the Roe and ultimately Casey. In my mind, they go together. Roe v. Wade in 72 and Casey v. Planned Parenthood in 98 that recognized reproductive freedom, bodily autonomy, a woman's right to make their own medical decisions with their doctor, with their family, their God, whomever they choose. And so I became a legal supporter of the Roe Casey framework as the darker themes of Dobbs emerge and we see the likes in states of Amendment 4 and others. I supported it. I would support it as governor. I would veto any legislation from the legislature that would put further restrictions on access or onerous requirements.
Okay. Another question. Um, how do we fight this big money issue in politics, something
Yeah,
you're going to be battling up against directly? I mean, I heard somebody estimate the other day how much it's going to take for you to raise to become governor, and I was like,
I
I
know.
almost fell over,
I
hoping
know.
that they were
We
wrong. But what are we
we
going to
need
do about this big money situation?
we need public financing of campaigns. I tried to fight for that when I was in Congress. And look, talk about a journey for me. I went in as a young lawyer thinking money is speech and should be unregulated. And I quickly saw what a terrible system we have. We have the worst campaign finance system in the world. We need public financing. We don't have it. We're not going to get there. Here's what I will tell you. Money will follow the polls. One of the reasons I am leaving it all on the field in every community now out there working as hard as we are is we are already moving the polls. If last November was a 14-point race, the Debbie Powell race against Rick Scott and the Kamala Harris Donald Trump race, we already have this race within 5 head to head with Donald's. Now there's about 30% undecided, but we actually pick up the majority of those undecided when they're presented with the contrasting candidates. Presenting them that requires funding to do that. The money polls, here I want you all to think about this. First, I've been very grateful. We already have contributors from all 50 states. We've been able to nationalize this race in the small dollar community. We're going to keep doing that. We have virtually all of the leading larger donors on our side committed to our candidacy to this race. So the resources are there to start, but they are, woefully insufficient compared to our opponents. But here's my general plan, and I hope you will follow this. We will continue to move the polls into next calendar year. And as we do that, more money will come in, and that'll give us a certain benchmark. And then by next June, I want our polls to be at, say, 3% and a certain amount of cash on hand. If we hit that target next summer, if we have this to be a 3-point race, don't worry about money. Don't worry about money. If Florida's governor's race is a 3-point race next summer, the money will be there for us to win. And here's the most important thing. Even though we will be outspent, no amount of money can stop a movement. And so if we do our part to move the polls by next summer, it will be unstoppable going into next November. I say that as someone who's run campaigns, not as just a Pollyanna optimist candidate. If we move the polls, strongly move the polls by next summer, money's not going to be the impediment that we currently think it might be.
Okay. Well, you've been incredibly gracious. We've got one more question, which I threw 2 together.
Okay.
And it has to do with what can we do to protect undocumented workers, and what are your thoughts on strategies of improving the route to citizenship that doesn't cost thousands of dollars in attorney's fees? There's a lot to unpack
Yeah.
in those, but those are the questions that people were asking.
Yeah, there is, and a lot of it is federal. Here's something that I do think is most important. So first of all, what could you do right now truly that matters? There are a lot of legal aid organizations that are either providing direct legal counsel to some of these individuals or are fighting a lot of the president and governor's orders in court. I'm not going to mention any by name, but there are a number of organizations that are doing that could be a direct opportunity to engage, perhaps. But here's what I think we do when we win this race. We allow community law enforcement leadership to go back to making their law enforcement decisions that are right for their community, because every law enforcement officer will tell you an undocumented worker who's been here for 20 years, who's going to work every day, going home and contributing to their community is not where local law enforcement resources need to be, and they won't do it. They won't do it. They will ensure that we're chasing violent crimes and guns and human trafficking and financial crimes and elder abuse and these other things. And so part of the problem that has occurred is that the governor has injected himself, much like he has at the state university system and everywhere else. He's injected himself into local law enforcement, and he shouldn't. The governor's role is to step back and let local law enforcement officers determine what's right for their community. If unleashed illegal immigration is a community issue, then local law enforcement will figure out how to deal with that. But generally, they're not going to deal with that if it doesn't present a violent crime environment. So, look, consider some of the organizations currently providing aid to these individuals who are really the subject of an attack on their frankly their ethnic status, I believe, at the hands of many Republicans. Consider that, but let's win this election, because when we win this election, we get to return the state of Florida to a place where immigrants are welcome and celebrated.